Welcome to Orioles on the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. And on tonight's episode, we're going to recap what was an eventful Rule 5 draft for perhaps the wrong reasons for the Orioles as they lose Juan Nunez in the major league phase of the draft, plus 6 prospects in the minor league phase. In addition, we're also going to take a look at the pitching market, which continues to take shape, but Corbin Burnes is still a free agent and there's plenty of trade options available to the Orioles, including one that the three of us are really coming around on as maybe the top target for the Orioles. And we'll talk about all of that on this episode of Orioles on the Verge, which is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline continues to be the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting. From the earliest odds to in-game live betting, BetOnline provides you with all the action and the ability to watch the games as they happen. With the largest selection of odds on everything from football, the NBA and college basketball, NHL to UFC, head to BetOnline today and don't forget to use promo code BELIEVE. That's BLEAV for your welcome bonus on your first deposit. BetOnline, the game starts here. Wednesday's Rule 5 draft came and went with the Orioles losing a total of 7 players from their organization and not selecting a single player in the major league phase or the minor league phase. Now, it's a quick difference here to note that in the Rule 5 draft, a player chosen in the major league phase has to stay on the active roster of the club that selected him during the entirety of the major league season or be offered back to the team that he came from. So, in other words, the San Diego Padres, who took Juan Nunez, will have to carry him on the active roster all year or offer him back to the Orioles. Players taken in the minor league phase, though, are just gone. That's it. They are no longer Orioles. So we're going to talk about those 6 guys. But first, we're going to dive into Juan Nunez. Now, Nunez, unquestionably a high upside prospect. We had him 22nd on our last top 50 prospects ranking. And the only reason he wasn't higher was because of a shoulder injury that shortened his season in 2024. Up until the injury, which occurred in May, Nunez had been very effective at High A Aberdeen. Without a lot of updates, though, about that injury, we thought that maybe the Orioles could sneak Nunez through the major league phase of the Rule 5 draft. The Orioles took a gamble on that, and it didn't work out for them, at least for now, as the San Diego Padres grab him towards the end of the first round of the major league phase. Now, should note that at this point, we don't have any updates on the status of Nunez's shoulder. That hasn't come from the Orioles camp or from the Padres camp. But we do know that the Padres like Nunez, and for good reason. Pitcher with a 4-pitch mix, young, fastball with a good velocity. And while walks have been an issue during the course of his career, which began in the Minnesota Twins organization, he was able to cut back the walks quite a bit at Aberdeen this past season before the injury. Now the question becomes, is he going to stick on the active roster in San Diego for all of this year? There are also, of course, loopholes where if he spends time on the IL, the Padres can kick that decision down the road a little bit. So we'll get into all of that on tonight's episode, and we will get into the minor league phase. But I want to start with the Nunez pick. And Nick, I'll go to your reaction first. When we previewed the Rule 5 draft, we talked about how much upside Nunez had, how if he was healthy, there is no question you protect him. But because of the questions about his health and his relatively limited pro experience, it seemed like the Orioles were going to try to get him through. And that ultimately didn't work out from them. So what is your reaction to all of this?
That's the one that hurts. Has lost a lot of guys, and like you said, we'll get into the minor league phase guys who we lost, but the Nunez pick definitely hurts. And everyone, there's a lot of people seemingly very confident that Nunez will be back. I'm not confident that he will be back. As we were talking before we went live here, it is AJ Preller at the helm of the Padres, so he will find a way to keep on Nunez as long as Nunez shows up to spring training and pitches well. There's an argument to be made, and I don't know if I wrote this in an article or said it on the show where I said it, but there's a real argument to be made, depending on which list you look at. You mentioned he was 22 on our end of season list. He was way too low there, but MLB Pipeline, I think, had him as like a top 10 prospect in the system. Yeah, I think this is Juan Nunez. There's a very real argument. If he would have returned healthy next year in 2025 and taken that next step forward, I think there's a very real argument that Juan Nunez could have been one of the top two pitching prospects in this entire organization. And I don't think that speaks to the lack of pitching prospects in the organization at all. It speaks to how good I think Juan Nunez can be. You mentioned the walk rates. Yeah, they were a major issue. They were what last year he split time between Delmarva and Aberdeen. 11% Delmarva, 14 and a half, almost 15% in Aberdeen. Limited sample size this year, obviously, before the injury, but he dropped that walk rate to 8.5%, and the strikeout rate skyrocketed to over 32%. Like this is a guy. This is a dude. And the Orioles did a fantastic job developing him in the 2+ years he was here in the organization. He was really taking a step forward. I've talked about this numerous times. When you watch Nunez at the beginning of the year, you saw a completely different pitcher. You saw a very mature pitcher who clearly understood his stuff, and he was executing with Aberdeen. So yeah, this one definitely hurts a lot to see him go, because this was a legitimate start, I think, in the tournament. And I think the Orioles took a big risk by not protecting him, which I don't think any of us were concerned because he hasn't pitched well high A, but I think the Orioles probably took a real risk in not protecting him, and this one got caught.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, shout out to Vivek Shukla in the chat, who's a Rule 5 connoisseur, former guest of the show. If the Orioles would have picked someone, might have had him pop in here and talk about it real quick. But sad day for him when the Orioles don't select anyone, not even in the minor league phase. But yeah, Juan Nunez. See, before the show, I was like, oh, he'll definitely be back. I was one of those guys, and Nick is like, it's AJ Preller. He loves his young players and finding these loopholes. So I'm a little less confident. I still think ultimately he'll be back, just because if you're walking that many guys in A ball and you missed most of the season and you're coming back in the majors, to me, unless you're really going to mess with the injured list loopholes like the Orioles did with Anthony Santander a little bit back in the day, I just don't know. I just don't see how it could happen. But you never know. It does make me a little nervous. But hey, hats off to Nunez for putting himself on the radar enough to get picked, despite all these issues that we've talked about, issues as far as just experience at the upper levels. Hats off to him. He's going to get a shot to live his dream. Hopefully, he just gets a taste, gets some experience, and comes back to the Orioles and does break out in our minor league system at some point in 2025.
In most cases, I feel like I would be sitting here right now saying it's a better than 50% chance that he will be back. He was chosen by a team that has aspirations of contending, was in the playoffs last year. And although their rotation right now, when you get beyond the top two guys, assume it's a little thin, there's still enough arms there that they don't have to take that chance on Juan Nunez if they don't need to. At the same time, though, when AJ Preller likes someone, he really likes them. And that's what makes me a little bit nervous that in this case, if the Padres feel like Nunez is good enough that they're willing to put up with an ERA inching towards 5 in the bullpen most of the year because they feel like the long-term payoff is better, or they can keep him around because of health concerns, then I don't think he stays. So I know for myself, or I don't think he comes back, I should say. So what I'm going to be watching from here is how busy the Padres offseason is. And I'm not talking about whether or not they trade Dylan Cease. I'm looking at how they fill out their bullpen, how they address the back of their rotation, because that's going to tell me a little bit about where they see Juan Nunez fitting into their plans. That's going to tell me about whether or not they're willing to take the chance on him right here and now, or if it's we have him here as an insurance policy and a very high upside one just in case, but we don't think we're going to keep him around. So different organization, I might feel like Nunez is going to be back, but I feel less confident than that because it is the Padres.
Yeah, my mic good now?
Yeah,
Better?
you're good now. Yep.
Okay. Working out the technical kinks live. The other thing too, going to San Diego, like I know the big thing with Nunez was the walks, and that's pitching in a pitcher's park isn't necessarily going to help you spot the ball better in the strike zone, but he is going to San Diego, which is a pitcher friendly park. So I mean, if I think that's another bonus there. But yeah, I just think Preller is clearly not afraid to toe the line of when it comes to the rules, push those boundaries as far as he can. And if they truly do like Juan Nunez, he had that clip where he said, yep, like Vivek pointed out, multiple scouts were very in on Juan Nunez. They really like his stuff in spring training. I do think that they are going to try to find any way possible to keep him around. But yeah, that one definitely hurts. I think we were all concerned about Alex Pham being the guy. But man, when they read off Juan Nunez on that broadcast, it was like, oh, little did we know that that was just the tip of the iceberg. But that was definitely a shocker. I thought maybe Keegan Gillies, I thought maybe Alex Pham, these guys who were in at least Double A. But to see the Padres dip into the high A ranks and a guy who missed it wasn't like, oh, he missed the first half of the year and then had a decent second half of the year. He missed the last 4 months of the season, so they must have really, really liked Nunez to go ahead and grab him and bring him into the pro ranks now, the MLB ranks of their organization.
It's worth noting here before we move on to talk about the minor league phase, how close the Orioles got to successfully sneaking Nunez out of the major league phase of the Rule 5 draft. The Padres picked 26 in the first round. Of the 4 teams that had picks in the first round after the Padres, 2 of them passed. And all but one team, the Braves, passed in the second round. So there were only 3 players chosen in this Rule 5 draft after Juan Nunez. So I feel like if he gets past the Padres, he's still an Oriole right now, and we're not having this conversation. But the Padres really liked him. He was there at 26, and they took their chance.
Well, unless they took someone else and then took Nunez again in the second round, because why not? Which, speaking of, it's weird to me that I feel like Tampa Bay Rays are punting 2025 hardcore. The schedule changes. They're playing in a minor league park. 80% of their games in the second half of the season are on the road or in the middle of the season. And they have 2 Rule 5 guys now in their bullpen. Mike Vassell they traded for, and they also drafted someone. It's like, all right. It's just interesting to me.
Hey, I don't know if they took another guy a couple of years ago when they did this, but I know they also not Cleveland, but I'm pretty sure the Rockies drafted Kevin Kelly. I should know this. It's my guy. I'm pretty sure the Rockies drafted Kevin Kelly originally in the Rule 5 draft that year, and then the Rays traded for him immediately after the draft. So they just Rays are going to raise. They got to have their cheap guys at every position. So,
but that's why Shane Baz, you're on the radar as a trade target.
This, by the way, was the first Rule 5 draft since 2020 in which the Orioles had a player chosen from their organization in the major league phase of the draft. The 2 players back in 2020 who were chosen from the Orioles were Zach Pop, who was picked by the D-backs 6 overall. He was then traded to the Marlins, where he would stick on the major league roster for the 2021 season. And then the Cubs, with the 14th pick, took Gray Fenter and ultimately returned him to the Orioles during spring training of that year. But what happens with Nunez remains to be seen. Now, on to the minor league phase. And this is where we saw a lot of turnover. And leading up to this, we had said there might or might not be an Oriole taken in the major league phase of the Rule 5 draft, but you're going to see a lot of players leave the organization in the minor league phase. What jumps out, though, is that most of these players were at one point in time top 50 prospects on our list, or were very close to coming there. And in order of the minor league phase of the Rule 5 draft, the Orioles lost right-hander Tyler Burtz to the Rockies. They acquired Burtz back in 2021 from the Phillies for Freddie Galvis. Believer Dan Hammer to the Rays. John Rhodes, a third-round pick and an overslot sign in the 2021 draft, was left unprotected in the minor league phase and was picked up by the Dodgers. That was then followed by the apple of this show's eye for many years, Gene Pinto, who went to the Astros, Zach Peak, a former guest of ours, another guy that we were high on for a long time, was picked up by the Brewers. And then Elio Prado, an outfielder who always seemed like he was on the cusp of a breakout, but never quite put it together in a full season, was scooped up by the Phillies. So, all told, the Orioles had 6 players chosen outside of the organization or chosen away from the organization in the minor league phase. And as a reminder, there are no roster rules surrounding those players. So, they're pretty much not coming back to the Orioles. We'll talk about all of these guys a little bit, but let's start with Pinto because Pinto, you go back before the 2024 season, he had pretty consistently been ranked in the 20 to 30 range of our top 50 list. And then last year, eventually dropped off because he had Tommy John surgery, missed the entirety of the 2024 season, which was a year where we saw a lot of pitchers break out. Now, there were question marks about Pinto even before the injury, mainly the fastball velocity. But the hope was he would be back this year. If not on opening day, then maybe sometime early in 2025, go to Bowie, get some innings under his belt, and be back to where he was before the injury. Maybe that will still be the case for him, but it's going to come somewhere in the Astros organization. So let's start there. Bob, your reaction, Gene Pinto now no longer an Oriole, member of the Houston Astros organization.
I should have known that it was a bad omen that I wore a black shirt to work today in mourning. I preemptively mourned the loss of Gene Pinto. Not really a surprise that the Astros were, I mean, obviously it's a different regime now, but, Mike Elias comes from the Astros, trades for Gene Pinto, builds him up, and then the Astros end up taking him in this minor league phase of the Rule 5 draft, and he's just gone. Hoping for the best for him in his career. Hopefully he makes the major leagues. If he does, I don't want an Astros jersey, but I'll definitely get a Gene Pinto jersey from DH Gate or something like that. I wonder why Pinto wasn't protected. I think there's potential that the injury rehab isn't going as well as it could be or should be, or if his velocity has dipped a little bit, maybe he's lost a little bit of stuff on his pitches, and obviously the Orioles would know a little bit better than that than us or any other team. But I think it was a good gamble by the Astros to take him, and hopefully, like Vivek says in the chat, he's got a very high RPM spin rate slider. He had a great changeup. Obviously, fastball is not great, but when you have 2+ off-speed pitches, I mean, that's a recipe for a good reliever. Maybe like a 3-inning guy one time through the order. Yeah, it hurts. I'm not going to lie. I was looking forward to the comeback season for Pinto, but I have to watch it in a different organization now.
Yeah, and like I mentioned before the show too, I almost wonder if I don't know how many spots. I know there is a minor league protection list that isn't made public, but I don't know exactly how many spots are on that list. And it was a very big list of guys that, the Orioles had to protect there. And I do wonder with some of these injured guys, if they took a risk. Pinto, I wonder if it was a gamble there. But I mean, you're also knowing that, like Zach said, if these guys get plucked in the minor league phase, they're not coming back. So I do kind of, wonder and agree that maybe this is the rehab maybe isn't going as well, but like I said, we don't know anything. All I know is that, yeah, he was already an undersized arm, but what he lacked in size and what he lacked with the fastball, I mean, Fangraphs gave him like a 40 grade fastball, but 60 grade slider, 55 grade changeup. Those secondary pitches were lethal offerings and fun to watch. And when he got up to high A, that's when we saw him really struggle. But then, and that was back in 2022. But then in 2023, he returned to Aberdeen, and the walks went way down. The strikeouts went way up. The ERA dropped by a full run. He gets promoted to Bowie, and it was like about 30 innings when he was down there in Bowie. But he pitched to a sub-4 ERA. Walks were not terrible. Strikeouts weren't great, but we saw this all the time with guys. When they get up to AA, we see that strikeout rate drop, at least initially. I thought Pinto held his own. He had a couple of really great outings down there with Bowie. So he was holding his own, at least in his first taste in AA. at what, 21, 22 years old, so a little bit younger than a lot of the guys at the double A level. Yeah, I was excited to see what he can do. But it is a little bit comforting, I guess, to look at this and the silver lining in all of this. It is comforting to see, the Houston Astros, they're pretty good at developing guys, and they targeted Gene Pinto. I'll take it. Some of these other organizations, like the Dodgers, the Brewers, both organizations very good at developing players, targeting these guys, even some injured guys. So I wish Pinto all the best as well. And it is what it is. Hopefully he's not pitching against us at the major league level. But this is, I feel like, of all the 6 guys taken in the minor league phase, this was definitely the one that was like, ouch, hurt a little bit.
I have another silver lining case with just the whole fact that 7 guys got taken from us one way or another. Obviously, Nunez in the major league phase, but this is, look, we don't have the top end of our system like we have the past several years, but this system goes deep, and we've been talking about that, especially on the pitching front. And it just shows that we could lose these 7 guys and we're still going to have a loaded AAA, AA, high A like pitching staff. It hurts just because these are guys that we've watched get drafted or traded for and develop and fight through rehab and injuries and come back. But the Orioles are going to be fine. It sucks, especially Pinto and Nunez, the ones we're starting off with. They hurt the most. But yeah, it's just a testament to the depth in the system.
Yeah. And like I said before we came on, there's a vast group of international prospects coming up the pipeline. And there are roster limitations with these full season rosters. So this could be an instance where the Orioles said, hey, like, we'd like to keep a Gene Pinto. We'd like to keep a Zach Peak, these guys who have reached AA level. But, also if they do get picked, it opens up more spots. And with these higher upside, younger international players, it opens up more spots in Delmarva this year. It opens up more spots in Aberdeen. It opens up the logjam in the upper levels of the minor leagues. So, yeah, there are a couple silver linings here to all of this for sure.
Yeah, I think that there are, and it's something that it's worth pointing out when you look at the group of pitchers who ended last year at Bowie and the ones who are at Aberdeen that are likely to move up. There's plenty of depth, so we don't have to sit here right now and really worry about whether or not Bowie is going to have enough arms to get through a season or that Aberdeen is going to be thin on pitching next year. And there are still some quality arms. So Edgar Portes is Rule 5 eligible. He stays in the system. Alex Pham is still around. Peter Van Loon is still around. And you could go on with that list. But going back to the guys that the Orioles lost, talk about Tyler Burch and Zach Peak for a moment. I think it's appropriate to lump them together in some ways because both of them are acquisitions from the rebuild era. Burch, as I mentioned at the top of the show, was acquired from the Phillies back in 2021 in return for Freddie Galvis. Peak, meanwhile, was one of the arms that the Orioles acquired from the Angels in what is now officially known as the Kyle Braddis trade. Stop calling it the Dylan Bundy trade because the Orioles got Kyle Braddis. They won that deal. And both of these guys at various points had some helium around them. Burch was acquired as a pure relief prospect. One was very good stuff, though. He was in Bowie for a little while in 2021 after coming over in that deal. And then in the next 2 years, returned to the Bay Sox. And for various reasons, just felt like he couldn't master the AA level. Injuries cut into his 2024 season. So he only throws 9 1/3 innings during the 2024 campaign, but then goes to the Arizona Fall League after that, gets 4 innings there, and the Rockies scoop him up in the minor league phase. Burch, by the way, just turned 27 in September. Peak, meanwhile, is 26, and he will turn 27 in May. So basically, he will be 2027 for the bulk of the 2024. He'll be 27 for the bulk of the 2025 season. And for Peak, good stuff at times, but it has been a struggle for him to get back on the mound consistently since he had Tommy John surgery in the middle of the 2022 season. Now you go back to 22, he was with the Bay Sox at that point and looked like as he approached Rule 5 eligibility, he was going to be protected with a 40-man spot. But after the injury, the Orioles didn't do that. He managed to stick in the system for a couple more years, but ends up going unprotected and chosen by the Brewers. So, two guys that I think there were some hopes for at some point. I know Peak was fairly high up, our top 50 at one point in time. It felt like Burt's was either on the back end of it a few times or at least on the periphery of the conversation. But it kind of feels like for both guys, there was not a lot of room left for them in the organization, especially for Peak. So maybe a better chance at a fresh start somewhere else for them.
Tyler Birch, I mean, he wasn't even in my top 100 prospect list that I keep updated. Like, not too worried about losing a 27-year-old who hasn't been past Double A yet. I know he's got a nice slider. Obviously, with relievers especially, they could be late bloomers, and he could make his major league debut at some point and maybe be a solid reliever, but not losing too much sleep over Tyler Birch. Freddie Galvis, Hive, activate. That's where he came from, the Phillies with the Freddie Galvis trade. But Zach Peak, that one hurts. Not just because he's a friend of the show, he's a good dude, but in 2022, he was rising up our rankings big time. 24 years old or his 24-year-old season at least, with a great start in Double A 3.57 ERA, 3.50 FIP. He was kind of putting it all together. Then he gets hurt, and he just couldn't stay healthy. He hasn't been able to consistently be on the mound since then. Still think there's some potential there, especially as a reliever if he focuses on that. But what could have been with Zach Peak? Unfortunately, injuries happen a lot, as we've seen with pitchers, especially, and it really sucks.
Yeah, Zach Peak will forever live in my memory because I vividly remember. Well, first of all, like you mentioned, great dude, amazing dude, like 80 grade makeup, dude. But I vividly remember the night my daughter was born, sitting in the hospital room, holding my daughter, watching Zach Peak pitch for Bowie on my phone. But I'm pretty sure my wife being like, "Can you please stop watching baseball for just one night? You have a brand new daughter here." But I had to watch Zach Peak. No, it was the time of John's surgery, and then I forget what the exact injury was this year, but it was a big chunk. And I remember like reaching out to him, and the hope was that he would be back before the end of the year. He did get to come back before the end of the year and looked good. Like the command was there, or at least the control was there. Command, I don't know, but the control was there. He wasn't walking guys. He was striking out a lot of guys, got back up to Double A Bowie. And it was just that 2022 season, like Bob mentioned, before he had the Tommy John surgery. I also remember the game. I can still picture him walking off the mound and the way he was holding his arm. You knew that it was Tommy John. But watching him down there in Bowie in 2022, it was like same thing. Like I said with Juan Nunez, he was really starting to put it all together. Like he would let guys on base early on, but there was a couple of games there where it was like he would end like 4 straight innings with a double play. He was a double play machine down there in Bowie. He just looked like a much smarter, much more mature pitcher down there, and he was really working with his stuff well. That's why he was rising up our ranks so much. And yes, he was an older guy. He's about to turn 27, but he was drafted out of Winthrop in 2019 by the Angels, doesn't pitch that year after the Angels draft him. 2020, he has the pandemic. So his career didn't get started until he was 22, 23 years old in the 2021 season. And he moved really quickly once he started pitching there with the Orioles. But hopefully, for the Brewers, again, another good organization. And hopefully he's Tobias Myers 2.0 for them over there. I'll be cheering him on.
Talk for a minute about Dan Hammer, a reliever that was taken out of the Orioles system. Hammer has generally been a guy with good stuff, but has had issues with his walk rate at Double A Bowie over the last few years. And in fact, he's been in the Bay Sox bullpen for parts of the last few seasons, recently turned 27. So again, an older arm with good stuff, but clear command issues in his case. He has generally been healthy, but has struggled to locate his pitches when on the mound at the Double A level. So maybe the Rays can work something out with him, but I feel like overall this is a replaceable arm for the Orioles.
Yeah, I'm gonna miss Dan Hammer even less than I'm gonna miss Tyler Birch. And that's no offense to Dan Hammer. Like, obviously he has good stuff. There's a reason he was still in this organization after being drafted all the way in 2019. He walks a million people per game, but obviously the stuff is there because if the Rays want him, that's good. If we were keeping him around, that's a good sign. Great name too. Sucks to lose that, but his career with the Orioles since he was drafted in 2019, he again hasn't made it past Double A. Hasn't had success even in Double A. Career 5.11 minor league ERA over 211 innings, 263 strikeouts. That's really good. That's 26.9% strikeout rate. Unfortunately, he's walked 179 batters in those innings, which is a 18.3% walk rate, 7.62 per nine. FIP is no better at 5.06. I mean, hopefully for his sake, the Rays can help him throw strikes because he literally cannot.
Yeah, I don't want to pile on. He is still a professional baseball player and is a much better pitcher than I could ever dream of being. But when you're, what was it this year? 13.7 real quick. Yeah. When your 13.7% walk rate this year is your career best by a mile and a half, I think that says a lot. The one thing I will miss, he was part of that initial Michael Ash draft class back in 2019. And I do remember the Dan Hammer, and there was also another pick that year, Jordan Cannon, the catcher out of Sam Houston, and how fun it was to imagine Hammer pitching to Cannon. That would have been fun, but Cannon retired like 2 years later, and now Hammer's with the Rays. But yeah, good for him. Again, another good organization. Didn't even mention them earlier. Another good organization that clearly knows how to identify talent and develop that talent. Maybe they can unlock a little bit more with him. So best of luck to Dan.
Go to John Rhodes now. Third round pick in the 2021 draft. It was an overslot sign out of Kentucky. And at the time, the book on Rhodes was that he was a raw player, especially offensively. But if you could put all of the tools together, you had the makings of a solid everyday big leaguer. And there were times that we saw that during his career in the Orioles organization. And even when he was struggling, we would be hearing good things about the batted ball data. You could see the glimpses of power. You could see a pretty solid arm in right field. But in 2024, his second full season with Bowie, he took some pretty significant steps backward. In just about the same amount of games, 108 games in 2023 compared to 104 last year, his WRC plus dropped from 104 to 69. His strikeout rate did drop a little bit from 2023 to 2024, but his walk rate took a pretty significant dive in the process, going from 11.3% to 7.5%. And on top of all that, we just didn't see the power come through for him. Now, I do think he may have been playing through something in fairness to him. So I think that that does explain some of the setbacks that he had last year. But Nick, you had actually called this a couple weeks ago when we previewed the Rule 5 draft. You had noted that you didn't think Rhodes was a slam dunk to even be protected in the minor league phase. He wasn't, and he gets scooped up by the Dodgers. So just want to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that seemed like a pretty clear, they weren't going to protect him. Even in the minor league phase, I could easily see that, just because there was so much promise early on. I mean, amazing batted ball data. There's plenty of articles out there highlighting the batted ball data when he was in the lower levels of the minor leagues. He didn't swing and miss in the zone. He made good contact. The power potential was there. He was just never able to translate it into games. I even remember he was starting to get on a little uptick there a couple of years ago, and I think he went home for All-Star break, and some local paper did an interview with him, and he was talking about how he would text Adley even during the season in games when he was in, I think, Aberdeen at the time. He was texting Adley, and it was more of a testament to the kind of person Adley Rutschman is with the rest of his teammates. But it seemed there was all this underlying data that pointed to good things with John Rhodes. He's just never been able to put it together. He had the wrist injury that lingered, I think, for a while. There may have been something that happened before this year started that kind of maybe should have hindered, maybe should have had surgery before the year. But It's unfortunate for Rhodes. Again, he gets to go to the Dodgers, so he's gonna hit 20 home runs in the PCL next year, and people are gonna be like, "What the hell? You let John Rhodes go for nothing? He's got 20 home runs for Oklahoma City." Um, it was a tough fall for Rhodes, to be honest, and he was really though that first one. And we always say in this John Modes role, uh, mold, we've seen the Orioles go in the early rounds in each draft since that, 20-year-old, super young college bat that maybe had some issues. Max Wagner's case wasn't even a starter. Like these guys who they're young, they pop in models and they're going after them pretty heavily. Rhodes appeared to be like that first guy that was really in this new era of draft pick for the Orioles early on, and unfortunately just didn't work out for Rhodes. So again, I wish him all the best. I know, Bob, you interviewed him. You talked with him. It was a great interview with him many years ago. Another guy, though, I feel like was a 80 grade dude, at least to have in the system when he was here.
That's exactly how I was going to start things off. Just another just awesome guy. Like gave me great answers, great interview. Didn't have to. That was like when we were just getting started. It might even have, no, I think we had started, but yeah, it was very early on. Was a super nice guy. Obviously has all the tools. Like you can see it. He's got power. He's got a great arm out there in the outfield. He has good walk rates. Like everything's there. You can see why a team like the Dodgers would want him, because the tools are there. If you can get him to put it all together, it's just he hasn't been able to. I don't know. I mean, he's suffered through injuries. He's played through injuries. We know that's has been underreported, but sometimes maybe you should get the surgery. I don't know if that would have changed anything one way or the other. But man, I really do hope he can put it all together at some point and just make that loaded Dodgers team even more loaded. Yeah, John Rhodes, wish it would have worked out. Unfortunately, it's baseball, and sometimes it doesn't. But he's still got a chance for sure.
Yeah, he definitely still has a chance. And I think that in a situation where he's able to go regain his health, and he probably needs more time at Double A, but get to Double A, get your health in order, and I think Rhodes could still be something. And good for him that he's going to the Dodgers. It's a good organization that knows how to get the best out of its players. So if there's anyone that can figure out John Rhodes, I have confidence in the Dodgers.
Yeah, and I mean he's 24 now, so growth plates are probably in place, and yeah, the Dodgers know what to do with it.
We'll wrap up the Rule 5 portion of this episode with Elio Prado. Now, Prado was acquired by the Orioles for Andrew Kastner back in 2019, at the deadline. And we had thought for a while that we would see a breakout from Prado. And although there were glimpses of it, especially in 2023 at Delmarva, he was never able to really put it together. And with the outfield depth that the Orioles picked up in the last two draft classes, I don't think there was really room for him to get at bats at high A this year, let alone Double A. But going again to a good organization, the Phillies, where maybe he can put the tools together, and of the players we profiled tonight, he is on the younger end. He just turned 23 a couple weeks ago, so younger. There is still time with him, but I feel like as far as the Orioles organization went, time had kind of passed Prado by.
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Nick.
I was gonna say it last year. He trying to pull it up real quick. Last year, it seemed like maybe he was starting to break through a little bit. He was with Aberdeen again. The home runs were there. It was good to see him hitting some home runs at that Aberdeen ballpark. But this year, he didn't do anything with it. I mean, he didn't take that next step forward at all. He only had 4 home runs this year. He had 12 last year between two levels. Like a 200-something batting average, 650 something OPS, under league average bat. It was tough. It is weird that of the two, Noel Berth Romero is still standing in this organization. The bounce around guy is still standing from that Andrew Kastner trade. But good luck in Philly, the Austin Hayes replacement over there for the Phillies, I guess. No, but I never really saw much with Prado, to be honest.
I've always liked him a little bit. Another guy who couldn't stay healthy for a while, and then he has been healthy the last couple of years for the most part. Actually, he only had 300 at bats last year, so maybe I'm wrong. But he just turned 23, and in November he did improve his walk rate and his strikeout rate. Um, 96 WRC plus. I still think there's like a sliver of hope there, just because he's a good athlete. He's got a good approach, but yeah, unfortunately, you would have liked to. He would have been protected if he would have took another step in 2024 after a solid 2023 campaign. But it's again, you sign a lot of international guys, you trade for them too, because the more you have, the more chances of one's going to break out. But more often than not, whether they have the tools or not, they don't.
And for more Rule 5 coverage, you can go check out Nick's roundup at Substack. That's oriolesontheverge.substack.com. And of course, we're pumping out a lot of content over there. So if you haven't become a subscriber yet, please consider doing so. We'll move on now to the pitching market at the major league level, which continues to move quickly. Max Fried signed a big contract with the Yankees after they lost out on Juan Soto. The Red Sox respond by getting arguably the best pitcher available in the trade market this offseason, and Garrett Crochet from the White Sox. They send back in return to Chicago a 4-player package headlined by catcher Kyle Teal. So despite how fast things are moving, and we did see Nathan Eovaldi sign with the Rangers as well at the winter meetings, there's still a lot of options for the Orioles. For one thing, Corbin Burns is still a free agent, so there's always a possibility they grab him. But if Corbin Burns does sign elsewhere, there are still options to be had on the trade market, which brings us to a conversation we had off air after we recorded an episode on Sunday about the Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sanchez signings. Now, for a note about what goes on behind the scenes of this show, our conversations after the episode sometimes are kind of long. It's a chance for us to bounce ideas off each other. Half of what we say off the air in these conversations never makes it on to an episode. But we felt like we had to pull this one out, which is that we think we might have found the guy that is going to be the trade target for the Orioles. It's a little bit under the radar, but a pitcher with a track record of success that is starting to be speculated as a trade chip, and that's Zach Gallen. And we came up with some ways that we thought a Gallen deal might work. And Nick had a really off the wall idea that I wish would happen for chaos sake. And I'm going to get to that in a moment. But Bob, I want to start with you because you're the one who's a trade simulator. So why settle on Zach Gallen as the guy the Orioles possibly will and possibly should target for the top of their rotation?
Yeah, I think it started because it's like, the Orioles, they don't leak things. If you hear the Orioles connected with someone, it's probably because they had talked to them. They've moved on at this point. That's why I think we've been connected with Dylan Cease today, I think, with John Morrissey report. So I'm like, well, we're not getting Dylan Cease. We checked in. Not going to work because the Orioles they don't leak. And our trades seem to come just out of nowhere. And it's what we didn't expect. And it's like, just like with Corbin Burns, who's that top of the rotation type of guy who's got a year or two left, and just would be unexpected, but it makes sense when you think about it. And yeah, I think Zach Gallen makes a ton of sense because he is 29 years old in his prime. He's in his walk year, and there have been reports that the Diamondbacks are willing to listen on all of their pitchers. So potentially available, maybe not, but it just kind of fits the bill. And if Christian Walker signs somewhere else, they have a hole at first base. What do you know? We have Ryan Mountcastle, a Ryan O'Hearn, a Heston Kjerstad potentially. I'd prefer it to be led by Ryan Mountcastle in that trade personally, but yeah, I think there is a fit there. I'm trying to pull up the exact trade scenario that we kind of put together last time. So while I'm doing that, let's let Nick give his thoughts.
Yeah, the Gallen thing, it was just, there's so much, oh, it's going to be Garrett Crochet. Well, it's not going to be Garrett Crochet now, obviously. Freaking Boston. We all were afraid of Boston coming into the offseason. Sorry about that. And look, I think they're validating some of those fears there. But, Framber Valdez, Framber Valdez still at the top of my list for sure. But, you're looking around, it's kind of hard to find another team that's probably willing to deal. And Arizona works. And then, like Bob said, they're reportedly listing on offers. I feel like in this market, they'd be stupid not to. Now, they have a lot of holes. They've got Pavin Smith over there at first base. They've got like Alec Thomas at DH or something. I don't know. They need corner outfield help. They need first base help. They need catching help as well, I think. You can move. They'd probably want to move Eduardo Rodriguez, maybe Brandon Pfaadt. He looks like a Cy Young winner one day, like 1 out of 15 starts. The other 14 are meh. But I feel like they have a deep rotation. It may not be full of high quality guys, but it's deep that, you could move Zach Gallen, who's got 1 year left, to fill a lot of other needs. Go the Milwaukee route like they did with Corbin Burns last year. I felt like that one fit. That one good. And I thought I even had a big breakthrough, but apparently shout out to, was it Birdfan123 in the Discord? Like an hour before I messaged you guys, I was like, I got the connection. Apparently like an hour before he posted it in the chat. I was like, well, okay. Thank you for that one. But Matt Blood went to UNC. Zach Gallen went to UNC. Matt Blood was a scout for the St. Louis Cardinals. The St. Louis Cardinals drafted Zach Gallen. It just makes too much sense. There's at least that connection there. But yeah, I like Gallen. And yeah, as we were just kind of spitballing, there's a reason a lot of what we talk about after the show doesn't come on air, isn't recorded, thankfully. But, I talked about like the NBA. I wish the MLB, we always say like, oh, I wish the MLB free agency was more like NBA free agency. I almost wish MLB trades could be like more like NBA trades, because there's all this stupid money in the NBA. Your 13th guy on the bench is making $50 million a year. You see these trades all the time. They're like, 15 players for one team, just unloading contracts, and then all those guys get cut. Why can't we just eat Jordan Montgomery's salary, take on Jordan Montgomery, give us Zach Gallen, completely eat Jordan Montgomery's salary? We know Arizona hates him. They already said it publicly. They hate the guy. Eat that salary, and then immediately cut Jordan Montgomery, send him to the streets, and we got Zach Gallen for, whatever. I don't know, Emilio Sanchez. Like, I don't know. You're going to need a lot more than that. But still, I wish baseball would have more trades like that, because that's the deal that I'd be more than happy to do to get Zach Gallen. But realistically, though, I do think these two teams could match up, and I do really like Zach Gallen as a possible target.
Yeah. So the trade simulator here, I have Zach Gallen worth 24.6 points surplus value. Let's give them Ryan Mountcastle. He's got, he's middle of the pack first base type. I know we're ready to move on, but there's still 2 years of team control, relatively cheap. In that ballpark, could have a nice resurgence, nice bounce back. He's worth 6.7 surplus value. Let's give him Dylan Beavers, because it's not a trade unless Dylan Beavers is involved. He's 8.2 is his surplus value. And then let's throw in a pitcher. I mean, you could do Brandon Young, Chase McDermott, however you feel comfortable with. Or what is Albert Suarez's role on the Orioles in 2025? I don't know, but he's worth 13.3 surplus, 13.9, excuse me, surplus value. So we can even overpay for Zach Gallen by sending them Ryan Mountcastle, Dylan Beavers, and Albert Suarez. 28.8 surplus value for Zach Gallen's 24.6, and sign me up every day for that.
See some parallels between the Brewers or the Diamondbacks this offseason and the Brewers last offseason, which is they could go one way or the other. They could decide, we'll try to go all in for this year because it is Zach Gallen's last season, possibly in the Diamondbacks uniform. And let's try one more time. We just got to the World Series 2 years ago. They basically got out of the playoffs on a technicality last year with that ill-advised doubleheader after the final day of the season. So they were real close to making it back to the playoffs last year. Let's run it back with Zach Gallen one more time. Or they could decide Christian Walker is likely going to leave in free agency. Jordan Montgomery's contract is eating up too much payroll. We don't think we're going to keep Zach Gallen. So let's blow up the roster, or let's do what Milwaukee did last year in the case of Corbin Burns and try to retool without him. The Brewers played in an easier division than the Diamondbacks do. I'll acknowledge that up front. I don't see any path for the Diamondbacks to win the NL West unless a lot of players in the Dodgers get hurt. But they could still be a playoff team, and they could still trade Zach Gallen to the Orioles and get some pieces back that allow them to contend. Or if they want to go more in the rebuild route, we know the Orioles have plenty of prospects. So I actually think that the Diamondbacks and the Orioles match up better than the Mariners and the Orioles do in a bat for trade or a bat for arm package, because the Diamondbacks are at that point where they probably should take on some prospects, and Chase Field is a better place to hit than T-Mobile Park is. I don't see why Ryan Mountcastle would hold any interest to the Mariners, but I think he makes a ton of sense for Arizona. And if they could get 2 years of Ryan Mountcastle back for 1 year of Zach Gallen, they'd have to feel like that's a good start.
Yeah, and it's, you'd like to see this organization go off with the big free agents. And so you're not routinely trading off prospects or trading off pieces for these rentals, maybe in hopes that one can eventually sign to a long-term deal. But I think for right now, it's okay to keep going this route. And with Zach Gallen specifically, like I would rather even pay up a little bit more for Zach Gallen than, I wouldn't mind Luis Castillo at all. I feel like that price would be cheaper, but Zach Gallen, I feel like still has that little bit of upside. Like I just did a routine. This is just surface level searching around this morning in preparation for tonight. And like Zach Gallen's fastball was like crap this year. But it wasn't the last 2 years. Like the whiff rate tanked on that pitch, but everything else is still fantastic. The off-speed stuff was great. The breaking ball stuff was great. Just the fastball wasn't getting a ton of swing and miss. And according to like Baseball Savant, that his fastball run value was, like 20 something percentile. I don't know off the top of my head. I looked this morning. But anyway, I feel like there's still room to grow there, maybe with the fastball. There's more to get out of him. He's a younger arm. Like I like this idea. And if you bring in Zach Gallen, this gives you, I was also looking around steamer projections earlier, paying up a little bit more for Zach Gallen if you have to. That gives you Gallen, Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez. You look at steamer projections, those are all three pitchers who project to be around a 3-WAR pitcher this year. That gives the Orioles 3 guys in the top 44, according to steamer projections. And only the Phillies and the Dodgers have more in the top 44. And one of those Dodgers pitchers is Ohtani, who, we'll see how much he pitches next year. But and then Seattle has 3. So Steamer would love that rotation. It gives you 3 of the top arms in baseball. I've really talked ever since we talked about this on Sunday. I've been more and more in on this Zach Gallen trade as the season's gone on, because again, Luis Castillo, if you believe you can get a little bit more out of Castillo and he can have a bit of a bounce back, I'm on board with it. But I feel like the ceiling is a little bit higher with Gallen. Fromber's still my number 1 target, I think, in a trade now, at this point, now that Crochet is gone. But you've also got guys like Sonny Gray. I don't know if we're going to talk about him or not, but Sonny Gray is another big option as well. A little bit older guy. I feel like Gallen's in this little sweet spot here. But
yeah, I agree. And there are other places you could go with this. You could look at Sonny Gray. You could look at Pablo Lopez, who's reportedly being discussed in trades. But Bob, what were you about to say?
I was about to bring up a very similar point where there's other options as well. I said Shane Baz, half kidding earlier. I honestly think it's something that could potentially happen, whether it's with us or with someone else. But there's also, today there was a report that Jared Jones could be apparently available in a trade, who has 5 years of control left, some of the best stuff plus in all of baseball. That's enticing, and his value isn't as high as I thought it would be, at least if anyone gives any credence whatsoever to baseballtradevalues.com. And apparently they are willing to try to move David Bednar's contract. I think he's got 1 or 2 years left. Solid reliever coming off a down year. Give me both of those guys for Heston Kjerstad. Where's the rest? Heston Kjerstad, Ryan Mountcastle, Dylan Beavers, because again, we got to trade Dylan Beavers and Mariah Mountcastle in every trade, and Brandon Young. So Kershaw, Mountie, Beavers, Young for Jared Jones and David Bednar. I mean, let's go.
In Pittsburgh, like I do enjoy this Jared Jones recent discussion here today, but Pittsburgh is also a team that the Orioles are in this perfect situation here with all these surplus bats, and like Mountcastle is a proven veteran who you put him in the right park, as we've talked about before, like he could have a big bounce back year, but they have these major league ready pieces that they can move now. They don't necessarily have to move a lot of their top prospects. They've got good quality corner outfield, first base, DH type that a lot of teams are clearly in need of. And if you're Pittsburgh, I don't have Pittsburgh's rest of their roster in front of me, but I do know like Pittsburgh, like you cannot waste these Paul Skeens years. Like, and they have a lot of other quality pitching prospects coming up the ranks that could make their debut this year. I like that idea as well. What is Sonny Gray on the old baseball trade values website? Just so I have an idea. Take the website for what you will, but so I have an idea, what's his value compared to these other guys?
So while Bob pulls that up, I'll note that Sonny Gray has one of the more complex contracts of any trade candidate this offseason. He'll be entering the second year of a 3-year, $75 million contract. The way the contract was set up, though, he only earned $10 million of that last season. So he's going to be owed $25 million in 2025, $35 million in 2026, with a $5 million buyout on an option for 2027. On top of that, he has a full no trade clause. So it's a complex move. Not to say it can't, but it's not to say it can't be done. And there's still a lot to like about Sonny Gray, even if he didn't pitch at an ace-like level last year.
Okay, so it's a Luis Castillo situation, which is another name that is available. Negative 1.4, obviously, because of that contract. But shoot, if you're going to get him for basically free, send him Dylan Beavers or Ryan Mountcastle.
Gray is not a guy who, like, over the next 2 years, I don't see Gray, barring a major injury, of course, I don't see him being a guy who's going to break down over the next 2 years. So,
yeah, and just for the record, Jared Jones, apparently it's 40 point something. I already closed out that page, but 40 point something value for Jared Jones with 5 years control. With Zach Gallen is almost 25 with just 1 year. So I don't know. I don't know if that's right. I think he's probably more valuable than that.
Yeah, and there's the point of this conversation, I think, to take away is that even if it's not Zach Gallen or it's not Framber Valdez, there's still a lot of options for the Orioles on the trade market. I do want to bring up this point in a more kind of a broader picture, because we've already started to see this concern or criticism, depending on what you make of it, about the Orioles this offseason, which is why would they go the rental route again when they could go out and they could sign a starter to a multi-year deal? I don't think anyone is advocating for them to give Max Fried the contract that the Yankees gave him, but there's still, the Nathan Eovaldi deal with the Rangers might or might not have been obtainable. We don't know yet what Corbin Burns is going to sign for, but do you think that the possibility of going out and getting a rental again for a second straight year is a effective strategy for the Orioles to buy them time while they wait for Grayson Rodriguez to develop into an ace, hopefully, and start to get a little bit more out of their minor league system, start to bring in more revenue under this new ownership group? Or is it something that was nice for last year when they could bring in Corbin Burns, but it's time to do something different now?
I actually don't mind this strategy. I could see doing it on a semi-consistent basis at least. I mean, it's really expensive and hard to find a good deal when you're talking free agent pitching. Yeah, obviously, the Nathan Eovaldi signing, if he was willing to sign that same contract with the Orioles, yeah, I would have done that. But he wasn't, obviously. And he wanted to go back to Texas. He's from Texas. I mean, I don't know if the Orioles offered him that, but I would assume that if they matched that deal, it doesn't mean he's going to take the Orioles over the Rangers. Yeah, I think if you're smart, look, a rental is not going to cost you as much when it comes to prospect capital. And if we're going to have a stacked major league roster pretty much at all times for the next foreseeable future, then, and you're still developing and drafting and international signing guys that are very valuable to other teams, then I don't see why we couldn't continue to do this. We traded for Zach Eflin, had a year left. We'll have him for next year. I think we traded for Kyle Bradish, developed him, turned him into an ace. He'll be back at the end of this year and then hopefully in full time in 2026. Like, I don't think you need to go out and spend hundreds of $1 million on free agent starting pitchers. It's usually after their prime or right at the end of it. And the vast majority of the time, it ends up going really, really bad. And you just have excess money and you have negative 1.4 values, surplus values on your team that you're probably going to be willing to trade in a couple years. So, yeah, I'm totally fine with how the Orioles have been operating. And look, I know it sucks. The winter meetings are over. The Orioles didn't do anything big and splashy and or metrically sexy, but they did sign Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sanchez the night before the winter meetings. I wonder if everyone freaking out would feel a little bit differently if they waited a day or two to for those things to come out and kind of take the pressure off. But off season is far from over. Like we said last week or on Sunday, Corbin Burns trade happened February 1st. It's December 11th. Like, we're going to get two pitchers, starting pitchers. We're going to continue to improve this team throughout the offseason. So hang in there. I know it's frustrating, but be patient if you can.
Yeah, I don't see an issue with it right now. This roster, even at the major league level now, you have this backlog of players the surplus of players who you can move for deals and maybe make deals a little bit easier by trading, Mountcastle, Kerstad, or somebody like that. And the international pipeline continues to grow, and the farm system is going to continue to get stronger. It's going to continue to replenish. They traded away a lot of prospect capital last year, but we also saw a lot of guys really take massive leaps forward, specifically in the pitching department. And like we talked about with John Mioli last week, like, there's this massive pool of guys sitting there in AA, high A now that they are on the verge of real breakouts. And I'm pretty stoked to see which of those guys come out and emerge as like true starting pitching prospects. Like, is Michael Frett that guy? Is Trey Gibson the super sleeper guy? Is Nestor Herman the guy? Nestor Herman getting top 100 talk surrounding him. So I'm not concerned about continuing to go after rentals and maybe eventually find that guy who does want to sign a long-term deal in all of this. When you look at the trades, I understand the frustrations, right? It's only December 11th. Yes, the Corbin Burns trade happened in February last offseason, but when you see Max Fried go to a division rival, when you see Garrett Crochet get traded to a division rival, and the Orioles are still sitting here with, Zach Eflin, Grayson Rodriguez, Dean Kramer as your top three, which is fine. It's a solid base, solid framework, but you don't have that ace to replace Corbin Burns yet. It's frustrating while everybody's, spending the money. And here you had new ownership, and we're all expecting the Orioles to unload the bank on these guys. They're still going to make smart decisions. They're still going to keep long-term health as a priority here. So I fully understand the frustrations. It is annoying, but I am holding out hope as well. As we talked about a lot of guys there. Dylan Cease, we didn't even talk about Dylan Cease as a potential option, although I don't see why the Padres should trade him, to be honest. But Dylan Cease is out there in the market. You don't know what other teams are going to do and what other moves they can make, what other trades they can make that could open up additional possibilities that the Orioles could target. Do you guys still have any hope in Roki Sasaki coming to Baltimore? I know it's very low, but that could still be an option. Where he goes could still shake things up. There's still plenty of really fun options ahead for the Orioles. And if it's got to be a trade, like we had talked about with a lot of these options, you're really not going to have to make a huge dent in your farm system either. So it's still in a good situation right now.
I'd like to bring up the Garrett Crochet trade. And maybe this is kind of a test case for baseballtradevalues.com, our biggest resource in the offseason at the trade deadline. They had Garrett Crochet at 53.4 surplus value. Obviously, he's got 2 years of control left. I feel like the White Sox surprisingly did pretty well in the return. They got 2 top 50 overall Major League Baseball prospects by most outlets. Kyle Teal, 32 surplus value. Brady Montgomery, 15.2 surplus. Chase Meredith, 6.6. And Welcome Gonzalez, 2.8. So that's 56.6. Pretty close. Red Sox just had to overpay, quote unquote, a little bit based on the BTV website. What do you guys think would be the Orioles' parallel to this, and would you have done it or beat this offer?
If I had to look at the parallel to what this move would be without having the values in front of me, I would think that any conversation about the trade probably starts with Kobe Mayo and Samuel Basallo when the Orioles say no and the White Sox finally get tired of asking for them. Then you go down the list. Since Braden Montgomery went in the deal, I think Vance Honeycutt probably would have been on the table. I also think, though, looking at the return that the White Sox got back, proximity to the majors had to be a factor because Teal will probably be on their major league roster at some point in 2025. Montgomery, I feel like it's going to move through the minor leagues pretty quickly. So maybe by 2027, he's in your outfield. So at that point, you're probably looking, once Mayo and Basallo are off the table, one of Dylan Beavers and Judd Fabian. If not them, then definitely Enrique Bradfield Jr. And then if you want to sweeten up the deal from there, maybe Edgar Portes and Edwin Amparo. Just throwing a couple of names out there that could really raise the ceiling of the trade that are not top prospects just yet, but seem to be on the threshold of that. So I'm thinking I've kind of settled on maybe Bradfield, Honeycutt, Portes, and Amparo. I probably would have done that trade, but my guess is that the White Sox had a higher asking price than that, and I do think the proximity to the majors mattered a little bit. And if you're not looking at Basallo and Mayo in the Orioles organization, all of a sudden the options become pretty thin.
Yeah, I don't think the White Sox do that trade. I definitely think they want one of the big top 3, and I'm passing. We just talked about so many other options. There are other options that have also been discussed by others that we didn't even touch on tonight that I think would be equally as good, if not better. I'm allocating those resources elsewhere instead of for Garrett Crochet. I was never super pumped on the Garrett Crochet idea because clearly the White Sox are. I don't know what the issue is there between. I know they did the Eloy trade, but I don't know what the issue there is between, Getz. Maybe he is just a complete idiot. Something between Getz, Elias, I don't know. But something is just weird with those top line trade negotiations with the top prospects. I don't know. Yeah, he could be. He projects well. He could be a 5-6 WAR pitcher for the next couple of years. He could be fantastic. He's still young, but he's done it for 1 year. I'd much rather eat big contracts. I'd much rather pay up a little bit more for guys who have proven they can go 175, 200 innings multiple years. I'm fine with the Garrett Crochet thing. I'll let Boston take on that risk, but good for them for being aggressive, though. But
All right, I think I have a comparable trade in the machine here. Well, first of all, Samuel Basallo they have worth 57.5 value surplus, which I think is criminally low. I think he's untouchable. I think he's going to be one of the best players in baseball in a couple of years. And Kobe Mayo, they have 47.5, who I think is near untouchable. It would take a special return, I think, for me to trade Mayo personally. But Heston Kjerstad, 19.9, he's in this deal. That could be your it's not like a 1-for-1 thing anyway. Dylan Beavers, of course, 8.2. Vance Honeycutt, 8.2. And Cade Povich, 19.8 for 56.1 versus Garrett Crochet's 53.4. It's pretty comparable, and I still don't think I would do it.
No.
Povich could provide you almost as much value for a lot longer and less. I mean, he's not Garrett Crochet, but he'll be around. He'll be a starting pitcher in the major leagues for at least 5-6 more years for the Orioles.
I might have pulled the trigger on that one, and I didn't think to consider Kjerstad in my thing earlier about proximity to the major leagues, but my guess is that that's still not enough to get the White Sox because I can't tell what the valuation is on Cade Povich league wide. It seemed like a lot of people were very eager to write him off last year, even though I thought all things considered, he did a pretty good job for the Orioles, and I still like him a lot, but I know a lot of people aren't sold on him. So I don't think that would have been enough to get it done.
Senior Softball Games wants to know, would we trade Kobe Mayo for Logan Webb of the San Francisco Giants? I think he's got 4 years under contract remaining. That's a tough one for me. I'd have to think about it.
Straight up 1-for-1. Yeah, I'd do it.
Yeah,
I'd pull the trigger there.
I'd have to consider it for sure.
All those years of control. I mean, ground ball guy. He's 50-60% ground ball rate as well. Yeah, he doesn't strike out a lot of guys, but he doesn't walk a lot of guys. Keeps the ball on the ground. 4-5 WAR pitcher the last 4+ seasons. I so much of this for me just depends on it. Heston Kjerstad's this big question mark. Like, if I know for a fact Heston Kjerstad is going to take that big jump forward, 100% I'm doing that trade. But yeah, that's a fun one, to be honest.
It's also probably what Elias and company are dealing with now. There's so many options. Oh, it's 3 years of control. Well, my bad. So, I don't know, but there's so many options. Like, and you only have so many bullets. It's like, well, if I can get Framber Valdez without giving up Mayo, or I could get Logan Webb and it's a lot to consider for sure.
It's going to be someone that's not been talked about a lot nationally. It's going to be someone that half of the fan base is pissed off because they could have gotten someone better. It's not going to be the sexiest name, but it is going to be someone who can lead this rotation. It may not be someone who gives you the production that Corbin Burns did last year even, but I have all the confidence in the world that it will be someone worthy of leading this rotation. I do agree with Bob that there will be a secondary piece as well that's brought in to even just shore up the back in the rotation. It's going to happen. There are so many options. This organization moves in complete silence. And again, like I'm even bought in a little bit on this Roki Sasaki thing still to bring that back. Like, I don't think they're completely out of this thing because Kobe Perez's comment the other day seemed very quiet. Like, yeah, we're talking about it. That's a very Orioles thing to say, right? When I took that as they're really talking about it. He wants to go to a small mid-market team. He likes player development idea. The Orioles can do it. The Orioles are fitting a lot of this criteria. They're
MLB
super silent on it.
says we're the front runner.
Take that
like a month ago or whatever it was.
Like, I don't know. It's if you're pissed, like there's no reason for the extreme outrage that we're seeing from some people, but I completely understand their frustrations. I just talking with this helped a lot as well. I feel like today was like a weird gut punch to see your division rivals be so aggressive and then to see like your farm system get raided at the same time. It's like, what the hell? But I'm trusting this organization that they're going to do it. He said we had to wait for Corbin Burns. We're going to be up here late night one night doing an emergency podcast, holding babies, doing what we got to do to get it done. But it's going to happen.
Yeah, let it play out. Let it play out.
Absolutely. And we've got a lot of offseason left here at Orioles on the Verge. We had actually planned to talk about the MLB draft a little bit tonight because we now know the draft order for 2025. The Orioles are going to be picking 19th overall. Nick has identified some guys they could target. We were going to talk about that tonight, but then we decided, you know what, we've got plenty to talk about with the Rule 5 draft and with the possibility of a trade for a frontline starter. So we'll save the draft for next week. So tune back in next week as we talk about the draft. And, of course, whatever comes up in Birdland. And before this year is over, we'll have one of my favorite shows, which is our annual wrap-up where we look at the best and worst in the Orioles year. So look forward to that in a couple of weeks, as well as our draft preview next week. In the meantime, you can check us out on our many social media channels, including Facebook, Instagram, Threads, X, Blue Sky, TikTok, and YouTube. We're also over at Substack, as I mentioned earlier, oriolesontheverge.substack.com. And while you're browsing around the internet, be sure to head over to Patreon, sign up to become a member of our community. We do have a tentative date to roll out our top 50 prospect list in early January as part of a daily countdown. So you're not going to want to miss that. And as a reminder, if you are an existing patron, you can gift an Orioles fan a membership now. So go over to Patreon to check that out. For Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens, this is Zach Spedden. You've been listening to Orioles on the Verge, presented by Bet Online and part of the Believe Podcast Network.